feels like every year we have some tech issues, which makes me feel like we should just celebrate the people here in the room. Like, we got up in the morning and came to shul, but we appreciate that not everybody could be here. So we're glad that we're getting some people in from Zoom, and really grateful that our guest speaker is here. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon Ashenstein, the chair of our Lifelong Learning Committee, who's going to get us going with our program.
Thanks. I'm so glad you're here for the kickoff lead batter for the Lox Learn series this January and early February, and I'm delighted to welcome you this morning. I'm just going to give a brief introduction, but I want to highlight that our Lox Learn series is almost every week this January, and then in February we've got a great series. There's a handout up front. We've got Susanna Kolstead coming next, Rabbi Avram Israel Reisner talking about Jewish law. Got Sol Davis, the executive director of the Jewish Museum of Maryland. Is this even on? Yes. Okay. Yeah. And we've got Amit Peled, who is a cellist who will be sharing, world-renowned Israeli cellist. So he'll be sharing music and his cello with us in early February. So I'm delighted you're here. We hope to start at 8 with a spread in front of us and with our speakers and our questions. And it's a great privilege to invite my colleague, Neta Stahl, to join us at Beth Am and to share with us her learning. She's the professor of modern Hebrew literature at Johns Hopkins after having had a PhD in poetics and comparative literature from Tel Aviv. She's also been the director, and she's still the director of the Stulman Program in Jewish Studies?
I'm not finally.
Not finally, okay. She has a number of books, The Divine in Modern Hebrew Literature. She has in Hebrew, The Poetics of Yoel Hoffman. She has a book, an earlier book on the figure of Jesus in the 20th century Jewish literary landscape. So clearly a wide-ranging scholar of modern Hebrew poetry. And I'm very excited to have Neta speaking about a new project, which is reading Hebrew literature themes post-October 7th. So thank you and welcome, Neta.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you for having me here. I will start with a double apology. First, I'm gonna read the paper because I was worried that I won't have enough time, and these are big topics and I get carried away when I speak, and we wanted to have time for questions, and now I'm even more happy that I've done it because we start a little bit late. So it will be reading. The other thing is that I don't normally start or talk in public starting with, the autobiographical note, but I will do that today. Some of you know I was born and raised in Kibbutz Gaza, which was one of the epicenters of the October 7th attack. And my father, 2 siblings, and their families lived there until October 7th. My entire family basically was there on October 7th. We lost my beloved sister-in-law, and my niece and her boyfriend were injured. And in the days following the attack, one thought kept running in my head. And that was that I had finally gained access to the depths of the words of the poets whose poetics have been at the center of my research for many years. And working on Hebrew literature while living in the US, I had always thought that I had an intimate understanding of the poet Avotiv Shavun's phrase, the secret of the Torah of longing, which he used to describe the pain of longing for his loved ones. But it turned out that I didn't fully understand it. Mine was always, pre-October 7th, the longing for a place in a community that I could still visit, sometimes something that these poets could not. Having immigrated to Palestine before World War II, they learned of the destruction of their home communities in Europe and the murder of their entire families when they were already in a safe haven. I didn't yet understand the longing for one's own memories and the pain that such memories could bring. How can one recall the landscape of her childhood when it is tainted by the blood of family members, dear friends, and their own children or grandchildren? To be sure, I do not mean that what had been done to my childhood community is a Shoah, a word that some of the writers I work on, including Yeshurun, avoided. They, of course, used the traditional word urban instead, urban destruction. But for me, October 7th is the closest I could get. Sure. Great. Absolutely fine. I know that my height is not. But for me, October 7th is the closest I could get to what this generation of writers experienced when they learned of the loss of the world of their childhood and of the atrocity that had been done to their family members and loved ones. There are three writers in particular whose work comes to mind: Shmuel Yosef Agnon, Uri Tzvi Greenberg, and the aforementioned Avot Yeshurun. His birth name was Yechiel Perlmutter. At the time, I was working on a new book on Uri Tzvi Greenberg, a Yiddish and a later Hebrew modernist whose 1951 monumental poetic response to the Holocaust, The Street of the River, has since found a place in the Jewish literary canon. So his work was the obvious choice to turn, but I could not. And I turned instead to Yeshurun and Agnon. And this morning, I want to, among other things, tell you why I couldn't turn to Uri Tzvi Greenberg, and to share with you some general thoughts, not only about the differences among these three writers' responses to the Shoah, but also about what these responses offer us in the post-October, post the Gaza war, sort of post era. So Agnon's Agnon's a city and its fullness, sometimes translated less literally as a city in its fullness, is a posthumous collection of stories. He wrote about Buchach, the town in Galicia in which he was born and raised. The earliest of these stories, The Sign, a Siman, is not really a story about Buchach. It is about the author's attempt to remember it. After Gorin, the news reached us that all of the Jews in the town had been killed on the eve of Shavuot. The news of what happened in Kfar Aza reached me in Baltimore late on the holiday of Simchat Torah. So I had this sense of shared fate with Agnon, but I was also bothered by something that bothered Agnon. How could I remember my place and my people without contaminating the memories with the catastrophe that had just befallen us? Midway through The Sign, Agnon tells us that he has a custom of reading the religious poetry of the great medieval poet Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gabirol on the night of Shavuot. So Agnon returns to the synagogue late in the evening, but he cannot stop thinking about his place and his people. He recounts holidays, religious services, when the entire community gathered. And he also experiences a sort of a vision when all of a sudden the medieval poet Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gabirol appears to him and gives him a mysterious sign, a poem. So you can look at the first quote in the handout. I turned my ear and I heard him recite a poem, each line of which began with one of the letters of the name of my town. And so I knew that the sign the poet made for my town was in beautiful one verse, in a holy tone. Earlier in the story, the narrator explained that he recognized Ibn Gabirol's poems by the acrostic of his name in their first lines. In the memorial poem, that even Gabriel recites, it is the name Bujaj, Agnon's hometown, that appears in that acrostic. Here, and indeed throughout the story, I can't help but feel that Agnon has left us a kind of a sign, a suggestion for how to think and share the memories of a place and its people while still mourning their loss. How does one remember the city before its destruction? How does one keep those memories pure? And the next quote maybe answers this question. I closed my eyes so that I would not see the death of my brothers, the people of my town. It pains me to see my town and its lands, how they are tortured in the hands of their tormentors, the cruel and harsh death they suffer. And I close my eyes for yet another reason. When I close my eyes, I become, as it were, a master of the world, and I see only that which I desire to see. So I close my eyes and ask my city to rise before me with all its inhabitants and in all its house of prayer. This story, in fact, the entire city in its fullness, is a sort of a guide for how to remember the past without tainting the memories with the atrocities. Nostalgic at times, it is meant to recover the memories and turn them into a memorial of words, a sign, as it were. In the post-October 7th days and weeks, I also read it as a guide to remembering the life of a community without tainting it by the violent end. For Greenberg, on the other hand, the role of the poet after the Holocaust is very different. And this is, I remind you, Uri Greenberg, the one that I said I couldn't get back to. So let's look at an example. This is the next, this kind of poem by Uri Greenberg. And this is from his, I was planning to have a PowerPoint. This is from this monumental response to the Holocaust, a book of poetry that really became part of the Jewish canon as a response to the Shoah, to the Choban. And here is what he writes. And to any fire at dusk in Europe of the cross, why would I wail towards Arnon like a hero towards a battle? You are the fire, and I am to the thunder. I will praise you with much grace, because this is my joy. And I will not leave the blade, 'tis with me. I am he, whenever I turn. Listen to me in night of vision, to the song of the bush. Who else will sing the song of the fire in this generation? While Agnon sees the war of the author as the one whose words remind us of what was lost, Greenberg's poetic mission is to sing the song of the fire and the blade. Both Agnon and Greenberg frame their poetic mission within a theological setting. Agnon does it within a mystical vision of a medieval poet whose poems are part of the Jewish liturgy, and Greenberg places it within the burning bush from which God speaks to Moses. In doing so, each of them presents their art as driven by a great spiritual authority. But here lies another essential difference. In the case of Agnon, it is an earlier poet, while in Greenberg, it is the highest authority, God himself. For Greenberg, the response to the Shoah is the blade and the fire, meaning the act of war and even revenge. His poetic response to the Holocaust is presented as the product of a divine injection to the post-Holocaust Jewish poets to write poetry of war. Which brings me to Yeshurun, who, like Greenberg, left Europe before the war. Both poets wrote about their loved ones, the agony of losing them, and the world they lived in. But Greenberg and Yeshurun expressed their longing for both Greenberg and Yeshurun expressed their longing for what world for that world and bore a sense of guilt for leaving their families behind. The two poets lamented the destruction of their homes and community, but Greenberg's lamentation is imbued with anger and an urge to take revenge, while Yeshurun never calls for revenge and focuses on the life that was lost rather than the circumstances of their death and those who were responsible for it. Yeshurun focuses on the pain of longing and his own actions, or lack thereof, such as not answering his mother's letters, when his family and childhood community were still among the living. In the few poems in which he refers to a collective guilt, it is a collective guilt of an entire generation of young people who, like Yeshurun himself, left their families and communities in Europe and immigrated to a new land, leaving behind their Jewish tradition, language, that was Yiddish, and their culture. And here I quote, "I left a country, I left a language, I left a people, I left a city, I left Perlmutter's Jews." Perlmutter is his birth name. I left their language, I left my father, I left my mother, and I left my brothers and my sister, and I went to Tel Aviv, to the Davidian soil of the land of Israel, and I took a Tel Avivian Hebrew. Moreover, while for Greenberg, Jewish suffering led to his Zionist and later radical right-wing semi-fascist ideology that called for shedding blood for the sake of the Hebrew national redemption in the land of Israel, Yeshurun also identified with the pain of the Palestinian victims of the Nakba. He refused to ignore the agony of losing one's land, home, and community. He viewed instead the loss of his family and the destruction of his hometown as a moral legacy to forever remember this pain and therefore never inflict it on others. I'm kind of like thinking whether to read it in Hebrew and you read it in English. I'll read because the Hebrew is, you need to hear it. ואבא אמא מן מלכוח אשל רב רבה מלקח, ציוונו יהנדס לא לשכוח, ועל פוילן לא לשכוח. So, and Father and Mother ordered us from the fire not to forget our Jewishness, not to forget what happened in Poland. In his idiosyncratic language, to which a translation cannot do justice, and I apologize, Yeshurun uses the word Yandes in the Yiddish dialect of his parents, which means Judaism or Jewishness, and embodies a deep moral commitment to do no harm unto others. The notion that our Jewishness obliges us to remember the Holocaust is not exceptional, of course. But for Yeshurun, this memory of the atrocities is important not for the sake of revenge or for preventing them from reoccurring to Jews, but for precluding them from reoccurring to any people, to anyone. Perhaps most important is the moral injection that he finds in his Jewishness to never become the perpetrators ourselves. In other words, as Jews, we are obliged to never do to others that which had been done to us. It is the legacy of Jewish suffering that calls for empathy for the suffering of others and for moral responsibility to never be on the side that inflicts this pain. Yeshurun, like Greenberg, speaks in the name of the murdered Jews, but while Greenberg cites them and God as calling for more blood, Yeshurun invokes his poetics to remind his fellow Jews that for the traditional Jews, what it means to be a Jew is very different than what it is done in their names. In the aftermath of October 7th, reading these poets side by side allow us to reconsider questions pertaining to lamentations, longing, and revenge. Each of these authors presents a Jewish poetic response to a collective Jewish calamity. Each of them expresses a sense of poetic responsibility. The question of responsibility then brings me to the last topic that I want to touch on today, and that is the reader's responsibility. If we reread the words of Agnon quoted earlier, forgetting for a moment that they were written by the great Jewish Nobel laureate, we may read into them the catastrophe that we created in Gaza. Take, for example, the passage we read earlier from the Psalm, the second passage that we read. At least for me, in the aftermath of the Gaza war, it is almost impossible to avoid reading it as if a Gazan author narrated it. I'll read it again. I closed my eyes so that I would not see the death of my brothers, the people of my town. It pains me to see my town and its lands, how they are tortured in the hands of their tormentors, and the cruel, harsh death they suffered. Agnon's words turn in my mind to the words of the people of Gaza who survived the war but lost their entire community, their city in its fullness. Here again, I'm not saying that either October 7 or the war in Gaza is the capital T, Shoah, but that my reading of the text, written in response to the Shoah, cannot return to my pre-October 7th Gaza war reading of them. And I have to say that I suspect that this is going to be the case of an entire canon that will be marked by the destruction of Gaza and its people. Now, returning to a personal note, I should say that since last spring, I've been in touch with people in Gaza, men and women with whom I've corresponded regularly, intensively, as a member of a grassroots organization that originated in Israel, which supports families in Gaza. One of them, Aya, a mother of 5 little kids who is sick with cancer, wrote to me last week the following words. My only wish in this life is the happiness of my young children, who have known nothing but death and war. When I read it, I couldn't help but think of the last sentence of the most famous Israeli novel on the Holocaust, David Grossman's See Under Love, Ayen Erech Ahava. A collective wish, and the last sentence is expressed by a collective main protagonist of the novel, and what they say together is that one day our child would be born. It's a wish. One day a child would be born, would know nothing but war his entire life. Indeed, you don't even have to be famous or to wish for your kids as little as that. But the fact that Aya, the Gazan woman, echoes the wish expressed in one of the most well-known Israeli works on the Holocaust, meant, at least for me, that we as readers need at least to acknowledge the way in which the reality of the last 2 years changes the way we read these works. Taking upon ourselves the responsibility as Jewish readers to realize the similarities is what I think will allow us to ask ourselves questions about reality, morality, and literature. It will force us not only to think of our collective memory, longing, and agony, but also of those of the Gazans. Thank you.
Lovely. Oh, thank you. And thank you for bringing your personal story and sharing with us how you move through these poems from your perspective. We have questions, I'm sure, from the audience. I'll sit down, I'll stand here. Zach has a question.
Thank you for that talk. I was really struck by how Adnan closed his eyes and became the master of the world.
Right.
I wonder, does he do that elsewhere? And was that a way? Do you think that was a way of sublimating or finessing his wish to see again his Bushite with all its inhabitants alive, as if like it would be too much to say as a human being, right? He gives himself the power as God, wish that into existence?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and in fact, this story in general is been read by Alan Mintz, I'm sure you know who is Zach and others, as sort of like he called it kind of like a building roman, and kind of like the appearance of the great poet, medieval poet Shlomo Ibn Gabirol, is sort of like a guidance of Agnon into becoming the author. I read it a little bit different. There is that part, but I think it's combined with not just the author, but the author that not just laments, but actually guides us through how to recover or how to remember, and in a sense, how to write about it. So for me, it was really, I wrote something actually based on it as really my first time of writing something after what happened. And I really felt it's like Agnon now give me the sign. And closing your eyes and imagine the city before is really is a great way not just to think of kind of like, I agree, maybe something inspired by God or almost becoming the authority of God. But I think in a sense also every one of us can do that, right? Just close their eyes and imagine. And he says, I think, to us in other ways in the story, you can, as a people and as individuals, you can recover. He describes in one part of the story how he goes to Shul and he sees other Jews that seem to just have learned the same news that he did. So he recognized in the story that it's not just him, it's an entire community that heard of the loss of their city.
I was in a group that was reading once a poem by a Hebrew poet whose family had come from Iraq, and everything in the story was memories about that. And people in this group, it was a kind of superficial reading, and they were like, "What a great, description of Jerusalem." I was like, "What river is in Jerusalem?" So, on that note, sort of, with this frame of reference, have you noticed any split or any just absence of this kind of echo in Mizrahi post October 7th?
Oh, it's a good question. I have to say I didn't research the entire writing of Mizrahi. Like you mean works that were written after October 7th?
Yeah,
or
just the general availability of a frame of reference. There's the Farhud, obviously, but like just...
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are mentioning first of some of the Mizrahi experience is involved. Like there are depends what you call Mizrahi, but people don't know that the Jewry of Greece was. And there is work on that. Of course, on the question of the post October 7th literature, seems to be there is so much, and there is this sort of I would say disagreement among scholars. First, if it's not too early. There was really an outpour, and I felt that myself, that people really felt the way to respond is to write. It's hard to evaluate how great it is. Or it's hard to even get the perspective to say what it means. So in a sense, I'm part of an editorial board of a journal of poetry, and someone asked if she can offer an article about the reaction to October 7th in literature, And we are not, we said maybe it's premature. It's hard to tell yet. People are still processing, and there is so much. So let's see. I mean, what I prefer to do is to go back to, those writers that we've read all these years as, our guidance for what it means to write after the Shoah, and that's for me more, I don't know, I can say something about that.
I have a question. I love the way you showed how the experience and the writing after the Shoah gave opportunity for a range of responses, and you've given us 3. Were there others that seem pertinent that you left out as you collected yourself around these 3 themes? Because it's immensely powerful to see the multiplicity of responses, and it's not that the Shoah means one thing and therefore we feel this one thing.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I really tried to kind of like take the, these figures and really also, even for them, I did kind of like a superficial, in a way, reading. But of course, there were a range of responses. Specifically in Israel, I have to say, the Shoah was not really, there wasn't even much fiction or poetry about the Shoah, more or less until we usually say the Eichmann trial. When, really before then, most of the writings were journals, and like, memories, letters, things like that. But none, there was this really maybe famous silence, both of the survivors, and for sure the younger generations and the Israelis that didn't want to hear it. That's the kind of like sad truth. The 48 war, the kind of like really euphoria of the Israeli statehood pushed the Shoah aside for many reasons. And the Eichmann trial was kind of like this public display for maybe the first time, the narration of the Shoah in public, and people really like if you know a little bit about the Eichmann trial, it was held not in a courtroom, but in a big beta it's called. It's like really sort of a big auditorium, and it was, of course, very public, and people listened to it. If they couldn't get it inside, they listened it constantly in the weeks that it was taken on. They listened in the radio, on the radio. And that's the first time that many Israelis heard the stories of their parents, even, or family members. And a lot of people that I heard from people who, as kids, heard it and still remember that. So in that, this is kind of like 61 is a turning point where poetry first, and then more like fiction started to emerge. And at first it was very realistic. And later on, around the 80s, especially with the appearance of the novel Sea Under Love, it became, if anyone read it, I highly recommend first, but it's very unrealistic, or it has a realistic part, but it has a very almost surreal aspect. It also has like funny elements, but it's not a funny work. It's a beautiful novel, and in that sense, the fact that became kind of like the most quoted Israeli literature response to the Shoah is not by chance. And the last sentence that I quoted was quoted by Bosman himself in the first memorial for his son that was killed in the Second Lebanon War in 2006. So he wrote it and said, this is the novel that I was reading when he was a baby, and now I go back to it and I say to myself, I wanted for him to not know a war in his entire life. So the connection to reality always been, in that sense, there, despite the differences. I think there is always some echoing of.
Thank you for the presentation, and I really appreciated your starting with your personal narrative and your experiences. I'm sorry for the experience of your family, of course, so many others. I'm intrigued by your reflection on poetry specifically, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you feel we're meant to receive, poetry literature as opposed to maybe historiography in making some sort of comparisons or sort of allusions to current events. And it's something I struggle with a lot because I feel like sometimes there's a quick conflation between past events and current events, and I really didn't do that and made a very clear decision not to do that. And yet, obviously, there are elements of things that happened 8 decades ago and more that you feel have relevance to your life and the life of Israel, modern Israel. And so, can you speak a little bit about how do you navigate in your scholarly circles or in the world the capacity to bring relevant literature, poetry. I struggle with this even when we use terms, as a rabbi, like Amalek, right? For me, when I hear people use Amalek, I don't necessarily go to the kind of genocidal implications of Amalek. For me, that's a motif and a character that sort of shows up in order for us to talk about evil and the manifestation of evil in the world. And that's, I think, a useful discourse to say about, like, what is there was a rabbi who just passed away in LA. It was one of my teachers, Rabbi Eli Shochet, who wrote a book called Amalek, the Enemy Within. Mm-hmm. And he really interrogates, like, what is evil and the Yetzer Hara and the extent to which Amalek is an external force and an internal force. And so when you think about, like, characters or poetry or motifs, how do you bring this literature without falling into the trap of saying that thing that happened then is this thing that's happening now?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. It's something that I think it's for anyone to make their own, I don't know, I would say in my experience, this literature can be, as I said, like a guiding path, or like, the way I feel like with Agnon, I felt it's easy for me to relate to it, and I don't feel any, but you seem to suggest as a tension or something that is not appropriate to kind of take it into contextualize the text that was written in different circumstances. But as I said, in regard to and this is, for me, there is also a sense of responsibility for our actions. My sense was post-October 7th that the most important thing is to heal. I was very struck by the fact that instead of healing, we went to attacking. And maybe I'm getting here too much but for me it was also personal because I knew people that were hostages. So it was, for me, a shock that there is even an option to go to war before you save your own friend, like our own friends and people and children, women and children that were still in Gaza when the war started. So for me, maybe like there was this sense of dissonance, let's call it, with like reading Greenberg, and it was hard for me not to think of it was hard for me to read poetry of violence. I wanted only to read something like the Agnons or Sharon kind of poetry that was soothing and was given, and so it in a sense the violence in the Greenberg poetry, the call for blood is not. It doesn't have to be contextualized. It's there. It's whether you are sensitive to it and you kind of like read it as it was always a challenge for me, let's say. But once you have, stories of people who suffer and you are in touch, as I said, with people that say, we are being bombed. And I have to run to live again and run to the other side of the Gaza Strip to find another place to have my family live. It even like the reality kind of comes into that, and I don't think. In one hand, I think it's hard to not read it into that. On the other hand, as I said in the talk, I also, and this is something that I'm kind of like still thinking about, I think there is a responsibility for the reader in that sense to read sometimes works from the past and think about what I'm doing today. I mean, I don't know, I think many of us, when we read about like the partisans or people who saved Jews in the Holocaust, we tend to think, what would we do, or if we were over there in that situation, what we would have done. So, and I feel the same way about literature, especially in this day and age, that there is a responsibility for the reader to read literature about atrocities or about things that have been done to our people, and maybe think what I can do if it's done to other people. I mean, I think there is some kind of a responsibility to do that as well. I mean, not in a sense that to blame people that don't do that, but in the sense that each of us kind of like need to find where they stand in that, context of what I'm doing in this world as a Jew, and what is the legacy of my family or great family that was murdered or maybe survived but was the victim of the Holocaust. So.
I have another question if there's not one emerging from the floor. Okay.
I had one more. This is noticing a layer of Yiddish that's underneath, especially as a Kulkim. So, Abba, Ima, Tata, Mama, these things, and saying Poland instead of Poland. Is there something that, native Hebrew speakers past this generation where this went away? Is the ability to
Absolutely. So Yeshurun, and you sit next to the expert in Yiddish, so I'm not. But the Yeshurun was actually famous for what he called here, like he took a Tel Avivian Hebrew, but he definitely wrote in a Yiddish Tel Avivian Hebrew. I mean, he combined the Yiddish into his poetry, and here he uses the word Yehandes, which most people don't really understand what it means in Hebrew readers.
Engineering.
What?
It's engineering.
Mehandes, Mehandes is engineering, and this is what most people will, modern Hebrew speaker would think it's like an engineer, but he uses it in the Yiddish, which is actually, as I said, the way people refer to Jewishness, Mehandes, this is why many of us, including me, when I read this poem years ago, I didn't really understand this stanza. And it's the work of other people, not mine, that they kind of like analyze it in that sense of that the Johannes and Poilim, they're Poilim, he actually writes as if he imitates the Yiddish accent, right? And he writes Yiddish into it, but also for any native speaker, native Hebrew reader, to read it, you can really read or hear maybe your mother's Hebrew or your grandmother's Hebrew. So, and I think he does it intentionally because this is what the father said to him, or at least in his mind, this is their legacy, this is their call from the father to remember that you're a Jew.
Wow.
So to me, poetry is a slice of art, that, like all great art, it seeks to find a way for the artist to express herself, and not so much thinking about taking how the larger world takes that poetry. And sadly, or maybe poetry is an increasingly small slice of modern art, even among so-called educated people these days. So when you and other modern poets are writing to express yourselves about these very important issues with the Shoah and Gaza and everything, how much of a feeling of responsibility to be an advocate for, say, for Tikkun Olam, it goes into the writing as opposed to simply closing your eyes and trying to remember your kibbutz before it was attacked? Is it a conscious thing where you hope that people will read you and say, oh, this is like, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, or this is like, Leaves of Grass, or other great poems that have lasted through history? Or is it just simply that you feel the need to express yourself and let things fall where they may?
Thank you. I have to admit, I'm not really, I don't consider myself a poet, so I don't write, but I do write, and we all in academia write a lot. And your question really speaks to something that really, this is one of the things that after October 7th, and again, mostly after the more than 2 years of war, and the aftermath of that war, I feel that my writing, at least, will have to be different. I do feel that that writing and reading, and I was speaking more about the reading, but I feel that the fact that these poets, for sure, each one of them in a different way took that kind of responsibility and write differently. And I think we, for sure, to advocate, I feel, specifically to advocate something about, at least to do a cheshbon nefesh. I don't know if tikkun olam is the right word, but sort of like cheshbon nefesh that brings, I think part of it is to also think of how to bring a tikkun, but maybe the tikkun can start by seeing the people on the other side. Again, because I'm really the quote that I read from Aya from Gaza, it's from my WhatsApp message. And this group that I'm part of, we are in touch. Even now, if you look at my phone, I have these people from Gaza write me and I write them back. And at first it was completely impossible to even think of, because most of them are members, at least at the beginning, were from Israel, Israeli women. It wasn't even it didn't even seem possible. But thanks God and thanks Google Translate, because we mostly don't read Arabic and they don't read Hebrew or English. It's amazing. I mean, Aya calls me my sister or my mother. She's much younger than I am. It's at least in that sense I feel the beginning of a tikkun. They know that we are human. That we definitely get to hear how human they are. And we actually really also get to help them, to send them like things that can bring some relief to their life. So I feel in that sense it's to write and to think of what it means to live in this world as a Jew post the Gaza war.
Well, I want to thank you for a very moving and brave and subtle. Join us next week with Susanna Kolstad, who will be talking about her Jewish journey. And Wednesday, Lox Learn. Thank you for kicking us off, and thank all of you for coming so early, and thank Bonnie for bringing the stuff from Goldberg's, and Alex, and Melissa, and Raf, Daniel. Thank you all for coming. Same time next week.